Throughout this spiritual journey, you hear a lot about ego and how the ego is the root cause of all of our suffering. And for that reason, many people decided to make a pledge to eradicate the ego, right? We basically waged war on the ego as being something that in order to achieve peace and happiness, we have to get rid of this ego. And I'm here to tell you that I believe that that is absolutely wrong. I believe that is the opposite of actually achieving peace. It's not to get rid of the ego, but it is to understand, it is to even love the ego. Now, what I'm not saying is that you let the ego do its thing and just, run amok and just go crazy throughout your life. What I'm saying is when we are loving the ego, when we look to understand the ego, it is really looking to connect with what the ego's purpose is, because the ego has a purpose. If you notice that within all of us, there are some commonalities between all of us, right? Consciousness, ego, subconscious, superconscious, right? There are some things that connect us all together. And if we have all of those things, that should tell you that all of those things are needed to be living in this experience, to have this spiritual moment or journey. And so it is not about taking rid of or getting rid of those things, those elements of obviously who we are. It is about learning how to manage those elements. You see, the ego is simply your yang to your yin. Your yin can be looked at as your consciousness, the purest part of you, the light of you. Whereas the ego, yes, it can be looked at as the dark side of you, the dark part of you. But in order to have light, you must understand darkness. In order to have darkness, you must have light. You cannot have one without the other. So realize that it's not about getting rid of that part of you and killing the ego, right? Having what's called the ego death. It is about understanding and transforming into something or someone who connects with the ego and understands how to manage it, how to direct it, how to actually use it for your advantage to achieve the state of fulfillment, happiness, or enlightenment that you wish to achieve. And so when you realize that they are both parts of each other, they are the contrast of one another, right? There are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot have a front without a back. You cannot have an up without a down. So when you realize that you have to have the ego in order to have the light, then the question is, how do you manage this ego? How do you accept the ego? And you accept it by understanding that the ego has a place here for us in this physical realm, this earthly realm, this physical realm. And that is to create a sense of identity. Understand that you are you because of your ego. If you are pure consciousness, then you will be one with the grand consciousness, right? But because of the ego, you have a sense of being yourself, as well as the conscious side of you, the consciousness of you being connected with the grand consciousness as well. So you have these two things happening simultaneously at one time. And oftentimes that creates the confusion between us all, for us all. But when you realize that, hey, these things have their place, how do I figure out where these things meet or where they are placed, how to organize them, how to think through them, how to practically use them along this spiritual journey, then that takes you to a space of truly connecting with yourself, which means connecting with the God within you, connecting with the fact that you are God of your reality, your universe. Now, this is about loving your ego. This isn't about enabling your ego, you see, because when we enable our ego can be full of programs, fears, thoughts that were given to us when we were a child, that were given to us by our parents, grandparents, particular events where we process something that has happened to us, thinking that that was the best way to deal with it. And because we got through it, we programmed that as a way of being for us. Okay, we program that as a way of living through life. But as you grow up, you are able to use your consciousness to understand and make the corrections, to understand, okay, that way of dealing with that particular event or moment in time, I handled that the best way I could, But now, with more knowledge and more wisdom, I can pursue it or do it differently, right? And so as you pursue and do things differently, then you have to reprogram the ego to think about or to actually do things differently in alignment with your consciousness, in alignment with what it is that you want to be, live, and express. Now, as you go through this moment of reprogramming old programs, then you are actually using the ego to benefit you. You're using the ego to bring you value and bring you along the journey of your happiness and fulfillment. You have to get into connecting the consciousness with the ego, making sure the consciousness is communicating with the ego, understanding that the ego is your identity. Without your ego, you wouldn't be you. So you have to embrace that. You being you is very important. You being you adds spice and flavor to the existence of this reality in this world. If we all did not have egos, then we will all just be robots walking around aimlessly doing whatever and basically not having the context of achieving this fulfillment, the context of playing this game of life and finding happiness on our own terms. So when you connect and embrace the ego, okay, but you manage it by way of the consciousness and realizing through your consciousness what aligns with what you want, who you are, and your true potentiality, then the ego becomes your friend. You love the ego because you embrace it. All right. You don't enable it, but you guide it. You intentionally guide it to create patterns and ways of thinking and reflexes and ideas and habits that actually align with the life that you want. So it's not about getting rid of the ego. It is about embracing the ego. It is about loving the ego, accepting that the ego is there and it is there for a reason. And once you understand that reason and you learn to communicate with it, then it becomes an ally for you. But as long as we continue to villainize the ego, it continues to become the villain. You cannot get rid of it. So stop telling yourself or thinking that we can establish this ego death, because you can't. It's impossible in this realm where we are right now. So embrace it, understand it, love it, guide it, make it your ally. Thank you so much for listening. Peace and abundance always.